A bull moose finally steps into view after days of hunting. He is massive, the distance is reasonable, and for 1 second everything feels perfect. Then the bull turns slightly, the hunter fires. The moose crashes into dark timber and disappears. At first, there is blood, then less, then nothing. Hours later, the questions begin. Was the cartridge too small? Was the bullet wrong? Or did the hunter choose so much recoil that he never became truly confident behind the rifle? This is where most moose caliber debates go wrong. Hunters argue about muzzle energy, velocity, bullet diameter, and weight as if the biggest number automatically wins. But moose hunting rarely gives you perfect conditions, perfect angles, or unlimited time. Today on Firepower, we're ranking the major contenders from cartridges that demand too much perfection to the one that offers the strongest overall balance, because the best moose cartridge isn't necessarily the one that hits hardest. It's the one that leaves you the most margin when the shot stops being perfect. Moose don't die because an ammunition box prints an impressive energy number. A suitable hunting bullet still has to reach the vital area, and that is where one word becomes more important than almost everything else in this ranking: margin. Margin is what remains when the bull is not perfectly broadside, when the bullet has to pass through more tissue or bone, when distance changes, when the hunter is exhausted, or when the animal moves just as the shot breaks. It is the extra room for error when real hunting refuses to match the perfect scenario imagined at the range. But there is another side to margin. The shooter, too much recoil can reduce practice, create hesitation, and eventually produce a flinch. Too little cartridge capability can leave less terminal reserve when the shot becomes demanding. The ideal moose cartridge has to balance both sides: enough capability for the animal, enough shootability for the hunter, and that is exactly why the cartridges at both ends of this ranking run into trouble. At number 10 is the .416 Rigby class. Nobody questions whether it has enough authority for a moose. Heavy bullets, deep penetration potential, and serious big game capability are all there. The real question is what that extra power costs the hunter. Rifles are often heavier, recoil is substantial, ammunition is expensive, and meaningful practice can quickly become unpleasant. A cartridge this powerful only helps if the shooter can use it consistently without developing hesitation or a flinch. At number 9 is the .338 Lapua Magnum. It brings excellent long-range capability, heavy aerodynamic bullets, and tremendous retained energy, but most moose hunting does not require extreme range performance. That capability often comes with more rifle weight, blast, recoil, ammunition cost, and less frequent practice. Both cartridges prove the same point. More capability does not automatically create more usable margin. Capability you cannot comfortably use is not margin, it's baggage. And now we move to the opposite extreme, where recoil nearly disappears, but so does something else the hunter may desperately need. At number 8 is the .223 Remington, and at number 7 is the .243 Winchester. These two cartridges sit at the opposite end of the spectrum from the heavy hitters we just discussed. Recoil is mild, rifles are easy to control, and accurate shooting becomes much easier for many hunters. And yes, smaller cartridges have successfully taken very large animals under favorable conditions. But that is not the same as saying they give you enough margin. Picture a perfect broadside moose. The distance is reasonable, you have the right hunting bullet, the animal is calm, and your shot placement is precise. Under those conditions, a smaller cartridge can work. Now change just one thing: the bull turns slightly, the bullet path gets longer, more tissue enters the way, the shoulder becomes part of the equation, or the animal takes a step just as the trigger breaks. Suddenly, the margin shrinks fast. The .243 Winchester gives you more capability than the .223, while still remaining extremely shootable, which is why it ranks higher. But compared with the cartridges still ahead, both leave less reserve when conditions become demanding. That is the minimalist trap. You should not choose a moose cartridge by asking whether it can work when everything is perfect. Ask what remains when perfection disappears. At number 6 is the .45-70 Government, a cartridge that still makes a lot of sense when the terrain closes in. With heavy bullets, a large frontal diameter, and strong close-range authority, it is naturally suited to dense timber where shots are often short and fast. Picture a bull moose stepping through thick cover at modest range. In that moment, flat trajectory barely matters. What matters is how quickly the rifle handles, whether the bullet is appropriate for the animal, and whether the cartridge delivers enough authority before the bull disappears into the trees. That is where the .45-70 earns its reputation. But move the same rifle into open country, and the limitations become harder to ignore. Trajectory begins to matter more, practical range shrinks, and some heavy loads in lightweight rifles can produce substantial recoil. So the .45-70 is not obsolete, it is specialized. And the next cartridge proves almost the opposite. You do not always need enormous bullet diameter to get useful penetration and excellent field performance. At number 5 is the 6.5x55 Swedish, a cartridge that makes its case without relying on brute force. Its manageable recoil and excellent shootability encourage hunters to practice more, and with appropriate hunting bullets, its long-for-caliber projectiles can offer useful penetration on large game. That matters because less punishment usually means more trigger time. More trigger time creates familiarity, and familiarity improves shot execution when the bull finally appears, and there is no bench, no perfect rest, and no second chance to calm your nerves. But shootability is only one side of the margin equation. Compared with larger cartridges, the 6.5x55 offers less reserve when the moose turns, the bullet path becomes longer, or penetration demands increase through heavier tissue and bone, so its strength is balance, not excess. The 6.5x55 proves that a hunter does not need enormous bullet diameter to be effective. But it also reminds us that easy rifles create confident shooters, and confidence still needs enough cartridge behind it. At number 4, the .35 Whelen and 9.3x62 represent the point where extra power begins to feel genuinely useful instead of excessive. Both cartridges move into heavier bullets and larger frontal diameter, giving hunters more terminal reserve without immediately stepping into the punishing territory of true dangerous game cartridges. With appropriate hunting bullets, they offer strong penetration potential, serious authority on large animals, and excellent performance at close to medium range. That makes them especially attractive when the shot angle is less than perfect, or when the bullet may need to drive through more tissue and bone than expected. But the trade-offs are real. Recoil is heavier than with standard cartridges, trajectory is not their greatest strength, and ammunition availability can vary depending on where you hunt still. This category occupies an important middle ground, more reserve than the smaller cartridges, less punishment than the extreme big-bore options. This is where extra power begins solving real hunting problems instead of simply winning arguments. At number 3 is the .3006 Springfield, and this is where the ranking stops being about extremes and starts becoming about practicality. The .3006 does not dominate velocity charts, and it does not produce the most impressive energy figures, but it gives hunters something far more useful, very few serious weaknesses. It offers a broad selection of hunting bullets, manageable recoil for many shooters, widespread rifle availability, and ammunition that is far easier to find than many specialized cartridges. With the right load, it can cover an enormous range of North American game without forcing the hunter into a heavy Magnum platform. More importantly, people actually practice with it. A cartridge that is affordable enough to shoot regularly and comfortable enough to tolerate for long-range sessions creates familiarity. Familiarity builds confidence. And confidence matters when a bull moose finally steps out and the shot has to happen under pressure. That is the contradiction at the heart of the 30-0 to Swedish. It rarely wins a single ballistic category, but it almost never creates a major problem either. For recoil-sensitive hunters, this could easily become the real #1 choice, because the cartridge that gives you confidence every time you pull the trigger may outperform the cartridge that gives you more energy every time you read the box. At number 2, we have two cartridges that extend the practical hunting envelope without crossing into the extreme end of the spectrum: the 7mm Remington Magnum and the .300 Winchester Magnum. The 7mm Rem Mag brings a strong trajectory, efficient aerodynamic bullets, and excellent open country capability. For hunters who spend time in wind and wide terrain, it offers a meaningful step into Magnum performance without immediately becoming overwhelming. The .300 Winchester Magnum pushes that idea further. It adds more heavy bullet reserve, greater authority on very large game, excellent reach, and one of the strongest ammunition ecosystems in the Magnum world. That is why both rank above the 30-06. They give the hunter more reach and more terminal reserve, while remaining far more practical than the extreme cartridges we discussed earlier. But the advantage only survives if the hunter can use it. If Magnum recoil reduces practice, creates hesitation, or slows recovery after the shot, then some of that extra performance disappears exactly when it matters most. More performance only matters if you can repeat it, and #1 wins because it sits almost exactly between the extremes we have spent this entire video eliminating. What should the #1 Moose cartridge actually do? It needs enough bullet weight to handle a truly massive animal, strong penetration potential with the right hunting bullet, and enough reach for the distances hunters realistically face in moose country. It should also provide extra margin when the angle is less than perfect, while giving the hunter confidence in regions where large bears may share the same ground. But it cannot become so specialized that the rifle itself becomes harder to manage than the hunt. That balance brings us to the .338 Winchester Magnum. It offers far more heavy bullet authority than smaller general-purpose cartridges, yet it avoids the extreme specialization of the .416 class. It provides substantial reserve without becoming an extreme-range system like the .338 Lapua, and it fits the psychological demands of hunting enormous animals in serious wilderness. But there is one important warning: if you cannot shoot the 338 Win Mag confidently, it is not your #1 cartridge. In that case, the .3006 or another more manageable option may be the smarter choice. The .338 Winchester Magnum does not win because it is the biggest. It wins because it sits in the narrow space between not enough and too much. The cartridge name alone does not decide what happens after the shot. Two hunters can carry rifles chambered for the same cartridge and still get very different terminal performance depending on the bullet they choose. Bullet construction matters because expansion, weight retention, penetration, impact conditions, and shot angle all interact. A hunting bullet designed to expand quickly on lighter game may behave very differently when it encounters the heavy muscle and bone of a bull moose. A tougher, controlled expansion bullet may retain more weight and continue penetrating when the path to the vitals becomes longer or more demanding. That is why statements like "this caliber penetrates better" can oversimplify the issue. Cartridge size matters, but it is only part of the equation. The actual projectile has to match the animal and the conditions you expect to face. This can even change how you view the ranking we just covered, because the head stamp tells you what cartridge you brought. The bullet helps determine what happens after impact. So what is the real test for a moose cartridge? It is not, what is the most powerful cartridge I can tolerate? Start with the hunt itself. What terrain will you be in? What distances are realistic? What level of recoil can you practice with regularly without developing hesitation? Can you reliably find the ammunition you need? And can you pair that cartridge with a suitable hunting bullet for moose? Then ask the question that matters most. Does this setup give you enough terminal margin without destroying shooter confidence? That is the pattern behind this entire ranking. Small cartridges can demand too much perfection. Extreme cartridges can demand too much from the hunter. The best choices usually live between those two failures, where penetration, shootability, availability, and confidence overlap, because choosing a moose cartridge is not about winning an argument. It is about building a system you can trust when the bull finally appears: animal first, bullet second, shooter third, ballistic bragging rights last. The bull from the beginning finally appears again, but this time the hunter does not rush the shot. The moose turns, the angle is wrong, and he waits. Seconds later, the bull shifts into the position he has practiced for, and everything becomes simple. That is the lesson no ballistic chart can replace. Good hunters do not use cartridge power to compensate for poor judgment. They combine enough cartridge, the right hunting bullet, practice shooting, patience, and confidence. Technology changes, cartridge popularity changes, internet arguments never seem to end, but the fundamentals remain. The best moose cartridge is not the biggest cartridge you can carry. It is the one that gives you enough margin on the animal without taking confidence away from the hunter. If you had to hunt moose for the next 20 years with only one cartridge, what would you choose, and what real hunting experience convinced you? Tell us how long you've hunted, the cartridge you trust, the terrain you know best, your typical shooting distances, your biggest success, your biggest mistake, and what you would choose differently today if you believe shot placement, bullet choice, and confidence matter more than raw horsepower. Give this video a like and subscribe to Firepower for honest, experience-driven firearm, hunting, and ballistics analysis. Next week on Firepower, we're ranking the Magnum cartridges that look unstoppable on ballistic charts, but become far less impressive once recoil, rifle weight, and real hunting conditions enter the equation.